Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the postgame podcast. The Timberwolves fell to the Phoenix Suns on Tuesday by 9 in a game that was actually probably one of the Wolves' most competitive all-around games of the season so far, but there were certainly issues. We'll talk about the offensive issues early, the defensive issues late, some of the interesting rotation tweaks that Chris Finch made, plus individual studs and duds. We'll break it all down on the show here today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Hump Day. And this is the postgame podcast. The Timberwolves lost to the Suns Tuesday night. We're going to break it all down on the show here today. A big thank you, first of all, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. It also includes the brand new Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can download it, and you'll get more great local sports coverage 24/7. It's, of course, absolutely free. All Locked On Sports Minnesota podcasts can be watched on that Roku or Amazon Fire TV app. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves, and then also my account, which is at Beecken, and that's with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. All right, so the Wolves lost this one by 9. It was a nationally televised game on TNT. And I actually, I want to start here. I think the Wolves actually generally played well. They played, you could argue, one of their maybe even their most complete games. Not including the second game against the Spurs, which was after the embarrassment of Monday. You could argue that second game against the Spurs was maybe, they obviously won that game and won fairly comfortably. But this game, given the competition, given everything else, the Wolves were in this thing, with what, 3-4 minutes to play, and played well against a good team on the road. And they played hard throughout. There wasn't, even in that win against the Spurs a week ago, there was kind of this, I think it was the third quarter malaise where it's just like, we should win this game. We'll be fine. And then all of a sudden it's a close game again. The Wolves played hard basically for 48 minutes in this game. And I said this on the live postcast that I did following the game. Yeah, it's sad that that's kind of where we're at, that's what we're applauding. But I mean, it's a step in the right direction. It's still only game number 8. And I mean, we'd have, let's face it, much bigger issues if the Wolves couldn't get up for this game, right? Road game against Phoenix, 64-win team last year, national TV. No DeAndre Ayton, but of course, Chris Paul and Devin Booker and everybody else with the Suns. So I thought the Wolves played hard, and I think it was some combination of national TV game, good competition, a rising tide raises all ships or whatever that phrase is. You know what I mean? What one guy's going to play hard, and so the next guy's going to play hard, and it's kind of a domino effect where everybody's like, hey, we want to, we're going to play up to the competition, just like we played down to the competition against the Oklahoma Cities and San Antonios and I mean, I guess Utah's, although not really based on their record of the world. So I was impressed with the effort. I thought that was good. Early in the game, they were just missing shots. And I said on Sunday, when the Wolves only made 4 threes against the Spurs and shot 14% on three-pointers, that wasn't the main issue. That's not why they lost against the Spurs. It was one of the issues. That was the main issue, at least in the first quarter. You could argue first half of this game was the Wolves were generating open threes, open jumpers for the most part. They just weren't making them. Karl-Anthony Towns missed open jumpers. Jaden McDaniels missed open jumpers. Taurean Prince missed open jumpers, which we haven't seen much of yet this year. D'Angelo Russell. They were just missing shots. And defensively, they were competing. Offensively, I thought the offense, for the most part, was flowing well. The first quarter was all about Karl-Anthony Towns. He had 3 assists and probably should have had a couple of more. And the Wolves were actually running their offense through Towns. And he was appropriately aggressive, both with his passing and his shot selection. He wasn't making shots either. He started the game 1 of 7 in the first half. But the first quarter offensive execution was fine. It was fine. It was better than a lot of what we've seen lately or seen to this point in the season by the starters. And the defense was really good. The Wolves, outside of giving, Paul and Booker the mid-range jumpers they like so much and at least trying to make their lives difficult a little bit there, the Suns were missing threes. The Wolves were contesting threes. They were clogging the paint. They were defensive rebounding. Not a ton of second chance points early in this game for Phoenix. So all that was good to start the game. And then you get into the second half, and the Wolves were within, I think, 7 at halftime. 7-point game at halftime. And then the third quarter starts off with Phoenix just taking it to the Timberwolves. That third quarter, again, the third quarter malaise is what we're going to call it, I think, moving forward. It absolutely set in. And the Suns got open three after dunk after dunk. And the defense that was so tight in the first half was just suddenly extremely lackadaisical. And then eventually that gives way to the my turn, your turn offense that has been such a major issue for the Wolves at times this season. Well, really for most of the season to this point. And that was a big part of the downfall. Yeah, at least what gave Phoenix that 18-point lead. Anthony Edwards, again, the biggest culprit. D'Angelo Russell, we'll talk about turnovers here in a little bit. I mean, he was part of the problem as well. And then eventually there was some defensive selfishness as well, some gambling on defense. Trying to hit the home run, trying to make the big play, spark the fast break the other way. Again, good intentions, but getting out of position, not playing within the scheme, and ultimately hurting the Wolves. And as the Wolves, they did get to within 2 at one point even. And that was mostly Anthony Edwards hit a couple of consecutive, big time 3-pointers, and the defense was solid. Then all of a sudden, the Suns put their starters back in the game. I mean, that run was mostly against the Suns bench. It was Timberwolves, a mix of Timberwolves starters and reserves against a 5-man unit of only Suns bench players. Chris Paul comes back in the game, and the drop coverage gets sliced and it gets diced, and the Suns are getting open threes, and Chris Paul's doing whatever he wants against the Wolves perimeter defense and slicing into the teeth of the Wolves defense, driving and kicking, getting his own shot where he wants it. And that was basically it. I mean, it was a 2-point game. And then, sandwiched in, there were a couple of really bad Wolves possessions and Anthony Edwards isolation. That was the first offensive possession after a timeout. I can guarantee you that's not what Chris Finch wanted out of that possession. 2 possessions after that, a Jalen Noel isolation possession. And every time down the floor, that those 4 possessions consecutively, the Suns scored. It was Suns score, anti-isolation, Suns score, Timberwolves score, Suns score, Jalen Noel isolation, and don't score, Suns score again. So that right there, I think it was a 9-2 Phoenix run because of those isolation issues, or this, I guess, devolving into the take-turn offense, which the Wolves do far too often. Chris Finch wants the ball to move from side to side. He wants to run offense through Karl-Anthony Towns. He wants to run some pick and roll, controlled actions within, if they can't get out in transition to run, the half-court offense should be, fairly simple. Remember, Chris Finch is putting up guardrails. He's not calling plays like Flip Saunders or Ryan Saunders does, where there's complex actions. He's mostly calling pretty typical play sets that are asking his players to read and react. And for whatever reason, they keep devolving into this, isolation offense far too often. This team has far too much talent and players that have the athleticism and the skill to do so many things. It just, isolation basketball is not the solution for this team. All right. And that's really what happened at the end of the game. I mean, that was the Suns did what the Wolves couldn't. They took advantage of some sloppy defense, and the Suns defense wasn't great for a lot of this game either. The Wolves just shot themselves in the foot. We'll talk about turnovers next. Trust me, we're going to get to that. I want to talk turnovers, fast break points, talk Timberwolves bench rotation, and we'll get to individual studs and duds. That's all upcoming here next. First, though, let's talk about our title sponsors of today's show, and that is, of course, our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for betting football and the start of the new basketball season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth analysis on every single game. Big weekend of football coming up. We're about halfway through the NFL season. Thursday night game tomorrow for the NFL. College football this weekend. What are we in? Week 9 of the NFL. So yeah, just right at the halfway point this weekend as well. So BetOnline is the place you need to go for that. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, golf, NHL, you name it, they've got it. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Once again, thanks for making Locked On Wolves your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights that only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today available on this app that you're listening to right now, plus YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. Okay, additional takeaways from this game. Let's talk turnovers. So the Wolves have been so good at forcing turnovers defensively over the past year, really since Chris Finch became the coach in Minnesota. TNT mentioned this a couple of times. The Wolves had 85 consecutive games with 10 or more turnovers forced defensively. So that dates back to the first part of last season. By far the longest streak in the league. I think Phoenix was actually second, and they had 35 straight games. So 50 more games than the team that had the next most consecutive games with 10 plus forced turnovers. Phoenix only committed 2 turnovers in the first half. They committed 7 in the second, so 9 for the game, which meant the Wolves had limited fast break opportunities for themselves. They only scored 6 fast break points in this game. The Timberwolves, who were number 1 in the league in pace last year, number 4 in the league this year coming into this game against Phoenix, had 6 fast break points. Not a recipe to win against a really good defensive team, especially if your half-court offense is struggling so much. I talked about this earlier, or I guess it was on the live postcast I talked about this. Like, for a team whose half-court offense is so bad, transition opportunities are extremely important. And if you're not getting stops on defense, you're going to get less transition opportunities. If you're not getting out in transition and running, if you're not forcing turnovers, you're not getting out in transition and running, you're losing the opportunity for easy spot-up threes in transition, for trail threes, for corner threes that are going to be wide open, for easy buckets, for drawing fouls, for getting the other team in the penalty, for getting to the free throw line more often. All those things are connected. And it's one of the reasons the Wolves last year were unexpectedly so good on defense is they generated so many fast break opportunities based on turnovers. They were blitzing and playing high wall coverage on the perimeters. Jared Vanderbilt, Patrick Beverley, Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, these guys were jumping passing lanes. They were pickpocketing opposing ball handlers. They were getting out and running in the open floor and creating these opportunities. We have not seen that to this point in the season. Opponent turnover rate has been the turnover rate has been lower. The Timberwolves have been worse this year in generating those turnovers. Phoenix only had 9 in this game. And conversely, to make matters far, far worse, the Wolves committed 16 turnovers themselves, which is just an astronomical number. And there were a couple of really main culprits here. Karl-Anthony Towns had 4. D'Angelo Russell had 4. Ant had 3. Cat had a couple early. Second half, it was more D'Lo and Ant that were really hurting the Wolves with those turnovers. D'Lo had a couple in transition that were bad. Ant had at least one in transition that was really bad. And I mean, that was a major killer in this game. It led Phoenix, who likes to play fast. They played faster last year than they have so far this year. It gave them some open floor opportunities. It gave Chris Paul the chance to push tempo. And of course, it robbed the Wolves of scoring chances of their own when they turn the ball over. That's a given. But that was a major issue in this one for Minnesota. And I would say if I had to like pick a box score stat, if I'm not just talking about the offensive flow and then the defensive breakdowns in the third and fourth quarter for the Wolves as the main issues, like I already did, then I'd point to turnovers. Losing that battle, committing 16 and only forcing 9, and losing the fast break points battle. I think Phoenix had 16 fast break points, and again, the Wolves only had 6. That's a huge issue. And yeah, I mean, Phoenix made 4 more threes. They made, actually, the Wolves got to the line a couple more times than Phoenix did. Phoenix shot the ball a little bit better from the floor, but it was similar numbers, right? 43% to 46% from the floor, 38 to 39% from 3, 20 made free throws to 17. The Wolves had the edge. The bigger issue is the turnovers, the easy scoring opportunities for Phoenix that Minnesota just did not get in this game. It's a major issue. Rotation wise, Timberwolves did some interesting things. And there was a moment, I think it was actually it was after D'Angelo Russell picked up a third foul in the second quarter. So Jordan McLaughlin finished the quarter at point. And then in the third quarter, D'Angelo Russell got pulled in favor of Jalen Noel fairly early. Noel played some point. Noel didn't play well in that stint and was removed for Jordan McLaughlin. And then eventually Noel came back and played with McLaughlin. We also saw in the second quarter, D'Lo and McLaughlin play extended minutes next to one another. We saw a lot of Naz Reid at the 4. He got to play 16 minutes in this game. Chris Finch really trying to push some different buttons, pull some different levers, be creative in terms of his rotation. I talked about that a little bit on Tuesday's show. I was curious to see if that would come to fruition in this game or moving forward. And it absolutely did. Austin Rivers and Bryn Forbes were both suited up, ready to play, and neither one of them played. This was a 10-man rotation with McLaughlin and Noel each playing 22 minutes off the bench. Prince playing 17, Reed 16, and Kyle Anderson only played 14 minutes. I guess it was only his second game back from the back spasms, and he was questionable to play anyway. So still easing him back in to be sure, but I thought that was really, really interesting. Part of this was, Jaden McDaniels was in foul trouble. So he had 5 fouls in this game. He was pulled early in the third quarter with foul trouble. Kyle Anderson came in at that point, but ultimately that led to more minutes at the 4 for Naz Reid. And that's where the minutes came from. Kyle Anderson played less because Naz Reid played more. Taurean Prince played a little bit less because Naz Reid played more. All those guys have played the 4 at one point or another. But I thought the McLaughlin, I'd be interested to see what the actual plus minus looks like from the stint. But McLaughlin and D'Lo together was actually not terrible for a short stretch of the second quarter. So interesting to see if that's something that, and by the way, the rest of that lineup, Jalen Noel was at the 3, which doesn't happen often. Taurean Prince was at the 4, and Naz was at the 5. So a very small lineup for Minnesota, but mostly effective for, again, short bursts. And in this case, in the second quarter of this game, I thought it was pretty effective. Okay. One last takeaway. Jalen Noel, we'll talk about him in studs and duds. Actually, maybe we won't. I don't know that he's actually a dud from this game, but bigger picture, we have to talk about his shot selection. We have to talk about him forcing matters. Up until this point, I've unapologetically said, like, Jalen Noel's just got to go for it. He's a true, pure-blooded scorer. And, he can score at all 3 levels. He can score on anybody. All that's true. But he's got to pick his spots. He had a team best plus minus in this game for whatever that's worth, a plus 14. He had 4 assists, only 1 turnover, tied for second on the team in assists. But he was 4 of 13 shooting. He only attempted 1 3, and he only got to the line 3 times. He shot a lot of mid-range jumpers. Perhaps was inspired by Chris Paul and Devin Booker. I don't know. And I know Jalen likes mid-range jumpers, and he's good at them. But in this game, he was just a little too shot happy. He was being asked to initiate offense, to be the straw that stirs the drink, and he was not that enough, and not that to the level at which I think Chris Finch was expecting. So Jalen Noel's got to pick his spots a little bit better. Be careful about the whole, like, hey, I'm the 6th man, I got to score. Not every 6th man is Jamal Crawford. Not every 6th man is, I don't know, insert Tyler Hero, right? Jalen Noel is kind of his own version of all of these things. And sometimes that means he's got to pass the ball a little bit more. And this was one of those games, especially when his shot wasn't really going for him. He got to play some minutes with Cat. He got to play some minutes with Rudy. He's got to initiate. He's got to, again, be the straw that stirs the drink a little bit more often and with some more frequency. And unfortunately, he was not in this game. Okay, let's close today's show by doing individual studs and duds. So we're going to do that here next. All right, individual studs and duds from Wolves Suns. Number one stud for me for the Timberwolves has to be Naz Reid. 16 minutes, 13 points, 3 rebounds, 5 of 6 shooting from the floor, 1 of 2 from the 3-point line, 2 of 2 at the free throw line. He had a couple of really impressive kind of touch hook shots in the paint. He had the one crossover, the way he got to the free throw line. His one trip was first half. He was kind of like on the top of the key, a little bit to the right side of the paint, or excuse me, on the right wing outside the arc. Had just a nasty crossover, put it between his legs, went to his left hand, got to the rim, was fouled, made both free throws. He hit an open 3 at one point. I think his last basket or second to last basket was just a fantastic drop step. It was just kind of a whirling dervish spin move into a back down, into a drop step on the left side of the hoop, a tough basket. The footwork for Nas has always been there. The touch has always been there. It's been a feel thing. It's been a decision-making thing where Nas needs to get his opportunities. He's got to get into a rhythm, and he's got to make quick decisions. And we have not seen that from him for much of his career, still very young career. But and also defensively, it's been an issue at times throughout his career. But in this particular game, and really going back to the preseason, Nas has made those decisions much quicker offensively, and he's held his own on defense. 3 rebounds in 16 minutes. You can handle that. 1 steal, no turnovers for Nas in this game. He was second best on the team with a +10 plus minus. So 13, 3 and a steal, 5 of 6 shooting, 1 of 2 outside the arc. Again, the decisiveness with which Nas is playing, the confidence with which he's playing is massive. And he's been fantastic. And I will happily eat my crow if this keeps up. I talked preseason, actually during the offseason, I talked about the Wolves trading him, hopefully for a couple of second rounders. That looks absolutely foolish right now. I mean, I'll admit that all day long. I may very well turn out to be dead wrong about that. My thought process was like, hey, Nate Knight can do some of those same things as Nas. Nas struggles to rebound. The Wolves need rebounders. Nas struggles defensively. The Wolves need defensive bigs. I didn't think he would get enough minutes and could be worth more to a team that could give him more playing time and potentially then extend him. The Wolves, it's been reported by Darren Wolfson at KCP in the Twin Cities, the Wolves are in extension talks with Nas, and they're more likely to get something done with Reed than they are with Jalen Noel at this juncture. So I don't know. I hope I was wrong. To this point, it certainly looks like I was. Nas has been fantastic, and this this game against Phoenix was no exception. Another stud for me in this game, Karl-Anthony Towns. I know he committed 4 turnovers. I know he committed 4 fouls, a couple of them silly. That's always the case. But 24, 10, and 7, really good in the first quarter. He had 3 assists, should have had more in the first quarter. He started the game 1 for 7. That means he finished the game 8 for 11. He made 8 of his last 11 shots, 3 of 7 outside the arc. He scored a couple buckets in kind of pseudo garbage time. I'll admit that. But even still, he was very, very good early in the game. He was okay defensively. I didn't actually get to this in my takeaways. I talked about this on the postcast, actually. If you go back and listen to the live postcast, which is, if you're listening to this on the regular Locked On Wolves audio feed, it's the episode right before this. I touched on a lot of the stuff I've already talked about, but I also spent a little bit at the end of the show talking about defensively, the Suns making Towns fight through screens instead of just going straight 5 out and trying to isolate Towns defensively, making him work, making him get through screens. I think part of that was probably like, hey, can we get him in foul trouble with him running guys over? Can we, and also to make a 6'11" guy fight through screens is a really difficult thing to do. And Towns is actually better than a lot of people give him credit for in terms of defending in space on the perimeter. But, I'd much rather him be in space on the perimeter than backpedaling in drop coverage, right? And apparently, then I'd rather have him defending in space on the perimeter than trying to fight through a screen, because the Suns ran him around and through screens over and over and over. And I thought Towns played hard and put forth a good effort there. 24, 10, and 7 is nothing to sneeze at. This was a good game from Cap. Third stud for me is going to have to be Jordan McLaughlin. And he was good in 22 minutes, 9 points, 3 assists, 2 rebounds, no assists, which is typical for J-Mac. 4 of 8 shooting, 1 of 4 on threes. He had a big 3-pointer from the corner when the Wolves were still hanging around, but he did actually airball, kind of barely graze iron maybe on a couple of his other misses. So there were a couple of rough misses in there, but was the steady hand once again, stepped up when D'Angelo Russell was in early foul trouble. And then in the second half, when D'Lo was just generally struggling, J-Mac did a good job stepping in, which brings me to duds for today. D'Angelo Russell once again is on the duds list. Team worst -20 in the plus minus, 5 points, 4 assists, 4 rebounds, 4 turnovers. So 4 assists to 4 turnovers. That's not a good ratio. 2 of 8 shooting, 1 of 3 on threes, did not get to the free throw line. The 23 minutes are in part because he was in foul trouble early in the game, but he was yanked in the third quarter, pulled again. He came in the fourth after J-Mac had a rough stretch. And then D'Lo was pulled again with 3 or so minutes to play, with the Wolves down by just 3 possessions. A bad game from D'Angelo Russell. I mean, we're there again. I don't know. This is just a rough game, and maybe I need to do more of a full show kind of breaking down what his biggest issues are. But this was just not a good performance from D'Lo, and it's tough. I mean, when you have an undrafted, J-Max great, but D'Lo's the max contract guy. J-Max the undrafted guy who was on a two-way deal consecutive seasons. And he's been playing better than D'Angelo Russell this year, hands down. There's no question about it. Another dud for this game. I don't know. I don't really want to give out another. Jalen Noel did enough things. Rudy Gobert was not great. I'm not going to give another dud. We'll leave it at D'Lo. Well, actually, no. I'll give one to Jaden McDaniels. Jaden McDaniels had 5 fouls and 3 turnovers in 17 minutes in this game. He was barely on the floor because of foul trouble. The Wolves gave him a really difficult task. They asked him to guard Chris Paul and put Anthony Edwards on Devin Booker. And I actually thought Ant did pretty well on Booker. Booker ended up with 18 points and 18 shots. And I thought that a lot of that was due to Ant. I mean, he was in his grill playing good defense. McDaniels had a tough assignment, certainly. But 5 fouls and 3 turnovers in 17 minutes, not great. And did not contribute offensively at all either. 4 points on 5 shots in those 17 minutes. I do want to note, Rudy Gobert played 32 minutes in this game and only had 1 shot attempt. He was fouled a bunch of times, got 7 free throws, and weirdly enough, made all 7 free throws. So he had 7 points, 9 rebounds. All 7 of his points came with the charity stripe. 3 assists and a block in this game for Rudy. It was not his best game in a Wolves uniform. I think he played better than he did Sunday overall, but his impact was somewhat marginalized in this game. And, the Wolves, yes, they beat the Suns in terms of points in the paint. They were +8 in the rebounding category. Great. But the Suns made so many mid-range jumpers. They shot almost 40% from 3 that it didn't ultimately matter. They were just killed by these open threes from Cam Johnson and by Chris Paul slicing and dicing the drop coverage in the fourth quarter. And, that was kind of it. All right. Rest of the week, we'll have a show Thursday, a regular show Thursday. Friday, part of Friday show will be previewing Wednesday. Today's Wednesday show. Okay. So then Friday show will be in part previewing the Milwaukee Bucks game Friday night. And then we'll do the live postcast with Marnie Gellner from Bally Sports North following Wolves Bucks on Friday, and then be back to a regular schedule again next week. So that's the plan for the rest of the week. A big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. It's absolutely greatly appreciated. Of course, the show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken. You can download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app, and please do, on Roku or Amazon Fire TV, and listen, or I guess watch, all of your favorite Locked On Minnesota podcasts, including this one. Of course, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. The Locked On Podcast Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Reminder that for your next listen, you can check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.